Okay, so let me tell you how this all began unraveling. It wasn't some vague feeling or a whisper of intuition. It all started with a meeting I wasn't supposed to attend. You see, I work in marketing and Karen, my wife, works in HR at a different company, but our paths crossed unexpectedly. It was a Friday, one of those long, exhausting days where everything goes wrong. I got a call from one of our partners saying there was a mix-up with an upcoming project and that I needed to come down to a shared office space they were renting for the meeting. I sighed, already feeling the stress weighing me down, but I headed over anyway. The place was a nice, modern office building downtown, and I couldn't help but notice it was the same one where Karen's company rented some extra rooms. I was just sitting in the lobby, scrolling on my phone, waiting for someone from the partner team to show up, when I caught sight of something out of the corner of my eye. A familiar figure, Karen. But she wasn't alone. She was sitting at one of the tables near a window, leaning in close to some guy. He had that corporate polished look. Clean suit, bright tie, expensive watch. She laughed, but it wasn't her usual laugh, the one that lights up her whole face. No, this one was smaller, more intimate. And then, I saw him reach across the table and brush her hair back behind her ear, the way I used to when we first started dating. For a second, I just froze, as if my body refused to process what my eyes were seeing. I couldn't look away, and I sure as hell couldn't breathe. The guy, Greg, I knew him from all her stories, handed her a small velvet box. Karen opened it, and I saw that damn necklace. It glimmered in the light as she touched it gently, and she smiled. Not just any smile, but that kind of smile that comes from being cherished. A smile I hadn't seen directed at me in a long time. My heart felt like it was sinking in concrete. It wasn't just the intimacy of it all. It was that she hadn't mentioned this lunch, this meeting, this man. The way she looked at him was a look I thought was reserved only for me. I wanted to storm over there, demand an explanation, but I felt trapped, like my legs wouldn't move. The receptionist called my name, breaking my trance, telling me the meeting room was ready. I forced myself to stand up, but my entire body felt heavy, weighed down by what I'd just seen. I walked to that meeting in a daze, my head replaying the moment over and over again, like a tape stuck on a loop. I tried to focus during the meeting, but it was like every word people were saying turned to static. After about 30 minutes, I couldn't take it anymore. I excused myself, muttering something about needing to check on a project, and walked out of there. My legs moved faster than my thoughts, and before I knew it, I was standing outside that little cafe area where I had seen them. They were gone. The table was empty. The only trace left behind was an empty coffee cup and a napkin with a lipstick print. Karen's lipstick, the same shade I had bought her last year for her birthday, saying it made her look like a queen. I took a photo of the table, of the napkin, the half-empty glass that had Greg's fingerprints all over it. Part of me didn't even know why. Evidence? Proof for myself that this wasn't some twisted imagination playing tricks on me? I just needed something to ground myself. That night, when she came home, she was all smiles. She had bought groceries, said she wanted to cook us dinner. Something special, she chirped, like nothing was wrong. I watched her move around the kitchen, chopping vegetables, humming to herself, wearing that necklace that wasn't from the girls. My mind raced. Should I say something? Should I just grab her by the shoulders and ask who Greg was to her? Instead, I grabbed a beer, sat at the kitchen table and watched. She moved gracefully, comfortably, like she hadn't been out sharing secret smiles and gifts with another man just hours before. And suddenly, I felt this fury bubble up inside of me, but it wasn't ready to burst. Not yet. I needed more. More than a look and a necklace. I needed her to trip up, to give herself away. The next week felt like I was living in someone else's body. I went through my routine. Work, gym, dinners with Karen. But there was this constant buzzing in my head. A low thrum of anger and suspicion. Karen had no clue, or if she did, she was an even better actress than I imagined. She kept smiling, kept chatting about her day, but I couldn't help watching every move she made. Every gesture seemed suspicious now. Every smile felt fake. One night, while she was in the shower, I went through her phone. I know, I never thought I'd be that guy, but I couldn't just sit in silence, pretending like everything was fine. My hands were shaking, and I almost fumbled it when I put in her passcode. The screen unlocked, and I began scrolling. There wasn't much in her messages. just chats with friends, family, and me. But then I went into her email, and that's when things started to click. There were deleted messages. Ones that she hadn't completely gotten rid of because of some sinking issue. And there was Greg, her boss, his name right there in the subject lines. Meeting follow-up, great time today. Can't wait until the next lunch. Each message felt like a hammer to my chest, pounding harder and harder. Then I found one that she hadn't deleted. A message from a few days ago. It had no subject, and the body was just a string of emojis. A heart, a wine glass, a bed. My vision went red for a second, but I made myself breathe. I needed to stay calm. She'd be out of the shower soon. I closed everything, set her phone back down, and sat on the bed, trying to focus on something else. My reflection in the mirror across the room caught my eye, and for a moment, I barely recognized myself. The man staring back looked haunted, eyes sunken, jaw clenched tight. She came out, wrapped in a towel, her hair wet and dripping, and smiled at me like nothing in the world was wrong. "Hey, babe, I was thinking we could do a movie night. I need to relax after the week I've had," she said, her voice light and sweet, as if she hadn't just been exchanging secret messages with her boss. I forced a smile and nodded. "Sure, you picked the movie," I replied, but my mind was somewhere else. I had to catch her red-handed. I had to see this with my own eyes. The next day, I did something that felt completely out of character for me. I followed her. She said she was going into work for a quick meeting, something about a big HR issue that needed handling on a Saturday. She left the house in that same careful way, every detail in place, looking far too polished for an office full of paperwork. I waited 10 minutes, then got in my car and followed her. She didn't go to her office. Instead, she drove across town to a fancy restaurant. It wasn't quite lunchtime and the place was still mostly empty, but there he was, Greg. He was sitting at a table near the back, and when he saw her, he stood up, smiling. She walked over to him, and they hugged, but it wasn't just any hug. It lingered. His hand went down to her lower back, and she didn't pull away. Instead, she rested her head against his chest for a moment, like they were the only two people in the world. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I could feel the leather pressing into my palms, my knuckles turning white. I wanted to jump out of the car, march right up to their table, and throw it all in her face. The lies, the deceit, the ridiculousness of thinking I wouldn't find out. Instead, I grabbed my phone and took a picture. It wasn't clear. The window had a bit of a glare, but you could see enough. Her arms around his neck, his face turned towards her, lips close to her ear. I took a few more, my heart pounding so loud I thought I'd pass out. Then they sat down and she laughed, that same small, intimate laugh I had seen before. They ordered drinks, and as the waiter left, she reached across the table, her fingers lightly brushing against his. I knew this wasn't just a meeting or a work lunch. This was something else, something that had been building for a long time, right under my nose. After a while, they got up, paid the bill, and walked out together. Greg led her to his car, a shiny black SUV that looked like it cost more than my annual salary. He opened the door for her, and she slid inside, giving him a smile that made my stomach turn. They drove off, and I sat there for a moment, staring at the empty parking spot. Part of me wanted to follow, but I didn't need to see where they were going. I knew, and more importantly, I had seen enough. I had the proof I needed. When I got home, Karen was already there. She was in the kitchen, humming to herself, making sandwiches, acting like she hadn't just spent her day with someone else. I stood in the doorway, watching her for a moment, and felt something snap inside of me. She turned, saw me standing there, and smiled. "Hey, you're back early," she said, her eyes bright, her voice innocent. I walked up to her, looked her right in the eyes, and said, "How was lunch with Greg?" For a second, just a flicker of a second, I saw her mask crack. Her eyes widened, her smile faltered. She recovered quickly, of course, Karen was always good at that. "Greg? Oh, you mean at the office? It was just a quick thing, no big deal." I could feel my pulse in my ears, the anger bubbling up. I took out my phone, pulled up the picture, and showed it to her. "Really? Because this looks like a lot more than no big deal." Her face went pale. She stared at the photo, then looked back at me, her mouth opening and closing like she was struggling for words. For the first time in months, she didn't have an immediate answer. No lie ready to cover her tracks. And that silence told me more than any excuse ever could. Karen's face froze, her eyes darting between my phone and my face, looking like a deer caught in headlights. For a second, just 1 second, I thought she might tell the truth. Maybe she'd break down, apologize, say she'd made a mistake. I waited, my heart pounding, hoping against hope. But then her lips twisted, and she let out this scoff, like I was being ridiculous. "Are you seriously following me now?" she said, her voice hardening, her eyes narrowing into slits. "What? Do you think I'm having an affair just because I went to lunch with my boss? You know how important my job is. This is about my career, Ryan. You're acting paranoid." There it was. The gaslighting, the twisting, the blatant lies. The anger that had been bubbling inside me boiled over, and I slammed my hand on the counter, making the plates rattle. "Don't you dare," I said, my voice shaking with fury. "I saw the way you two were. I saw how he touched you, how you smiled at him. That's not just work, Karen. And this," I pointed at the necklace she was wearing. "Don't tell me that's from the girls at work. Is Greg one of the girls now?" She took a step back, her expression darkening. I could see the gears turning in her head, the lies forming before she spoke them. "You're being crazy. Greg is my boss, Ryan. He's just supportive. He knows how much pressure I'm under, and he's been helping me get through it. Unlike you. He actually listens when I talk about my work." That stung. She said it with so much venom, like I was some useless weight dragging her down. I could barely breathe, the hurt and rage twisting together until I couldn't separate one from the other. I wanted to shout, to make her understand how much she was hurting me, but I knew it wouldn't matter. She wasn't going to give me the truth. "Helping you through it?" I spat, my voice cracking. "Is that what you call sneaking around, Karen? You think I'm stupid? You think I can't see what's right in front of me? I saw you with him, the way you hugged him, the way he looked at you. That's not support, that's betrayal." She rolled her eyes then, as if I was some child throwing a tantrum over nothing. It was that dismissiveness that did it, that casual wave of her hand, as if my pain meant nothing to her. "You're overreacting," she said, her voice flat. "I don't know what you think you saw, but you're wrong. Greg and I are friends. That's it." I laughed, but it wasn't out of humor. It was the kind of laugh that comes when you've reached the end of your rope, when you realize there's nothing left but the raw truth. Friends don't give each other jewelry like that. Friends don't send each other love emojis. And friends sure as hell don't spend their weekends together behind their spouses' backs. For a moment, she didn't say anything. She just stared at me, her face hardening, her eyes narrowing. Then, she crossed her arms, and I saw it. The shift, the change from pretending to care to outright defiance. "Fine," she said, her voice icy. "You want the truth, Ryan? Maybe I like spending time with Greg because he's not constantly suspicious. Maybe he treats me like I matter, like I'm more than just someone who cooks his dinners and cleans his house." I felt like I'd been slapped. The words hit me like a physical blow, and I took a step back, my head spinning. "Is that what you think?" I whispered. "That I don't care about you? That everything I've done for you, for us, means nothing?" She didn't look away. She just stood there, her chin raised, her eyes full of something cold, something I hadn't seen before. "You care about the version of me you want, Ryan. The one who stays home, the one who fits into your perfect little plan. But that's not me anymore. I need more. I deserve more." I felt my heart shatter in that moment. It wasn't just the cheating, it was the realization that the woman I loved, the woman I had given everything for, had already made up her mind. She wasn't apologetic. She wasn't regretful. She was done. "More?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "And what exactly is more, Karen? Lying? Sneaking around? Making me feel like I'm losing my mind because you can't just be honest?" She shrugged, and that casual gesture, that indifference, was the final straw. "Maybe I just want to be happy, Ryan, and maybe you're not enough to make that happen." The words hung in the air, sharp and painful. I stared at her, and for the first time, I saw her for who she really was. Not the woman I married, not the woman I thought I knew, but someone who had already checked out, someone who didn't care who she hurt as long as she got what she wanted. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. If that's how you feel, then maybe you should go find your happiness with Greg, because I'm done being made a fool of. I'm done trying to fix something you already broke. For a second, something flickered in her eyes. Surprise, maybe even fear. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by that same cold mask. Maybe I will, she said, turning away from me, her tone dismissive. Maybe that's exactly what I need. I watched her walk out of the kitchen, her back straight, her head held high, like she hadn't just torn my heart out and stomped on it. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to let out the rage and pain that was tearing me apart. But instead, I just stood there, staring at the empty doorway. I realized then that whatever we had was gone. It wasn't a marriage anymore. It was a charade, a hollow shell of what it used to be. And as much as it hurt, as much as it made me want to curl up and disappear, I knew I couldn't keep living like this. Not with someone who didn't respect me, who didn't love me enough to even tell me the truth. I took one last look at the kitchen, at the half-made sandwiches on the counter, at the life I thought I had, and turned away. It was time to face the truth, no matter how much it hurt. It was time to let go. After that confrontation in the kitchen, the house turned into a war zone of silence. Karen barely spoke to me, and when she did, it was like talking to a stranger, distant, almost robotic. The tension was thick, choking, and every second around her felt like an unbearable weight. I knew something had to give. Either we fixed this or we walked away for good. But Karen wasn't interested in fixing anything. She came and went as she pleased, her attitude full of contempt, like she was daring me to say something. One day, I came home early from work to find her packing a suitcase. She didn't even look surprised, just glanced up at me like I was an inconvenience, like I had ruined her plans by arriving too soon. "What's this?" I asked, my voice low, trying to keep it steady. She was throwing clothes into the suitcase, not caring if they were folded or wrinkled. "I'm leaving for a few days," she said, shrugging, as if it was no big deal. "I need some space. I'm going to stay with Greg." My stomach dropped. There it was, blunt and unapologetic. No pretense, no excuses. She was going to stay with the man she'd been cheating on me with, and she didn't even have the decency to pretend it was anything else. I stood there, my hands clenched into fists, feeling the last bit of hope crumble. "Really, Karen?" I said, my voice shaking with barely controlled anger. "You're just going to walk out? You don't even care anymore, do you? You're not even pretending." She paused for a second, one hand resting on the suitcase. Then she looked at me, her expression hard. "No, Ryan, I don't care. I haven't cared for a long time. I tried to tell you I was unhappy, but you didn't listen. You just assumed everything was fine, that I was fine. But I'm not, and I don't want to be here anymore." Her words hit me like a series of blows, each one more brutal than the last. "So that's it?" I asked, my voice breaking. 8 years together, and you just decide it's over because you found someone else?" She sighed, like she was tired of the conversation, tired of me. "This isn't about Greg," she said, and I almost laughed at how absurd that sounded. "This is about me. I'm not happy here, Ryan. I need to find out who I am without you." I stepped closer, my eyes locked on hers, trying to see if there was anything left, any part of her that still cared. "You're kidding yourself if you think this is just about finding yourself," I said, my voice sharp. "You're running away because it's easier than facing what you've done. You're taking the coward's way out." For the first time, something flashed in her eyes. Anger, a spark of something real. She dropped the shirt she was holding and turned to face me fully, her hands on her hips. "You think I'm a coward?" she snapped. "Do you have any idea what it's been like for me? Do you know how long I felt trapped in this marriage? Pretending everything was fine while I was dying inside." I took a step back, stunned. "Trapped?" I repeated. "That's how you see it? I thought we were partners, Karen. I thought we were building a life together." She shook her head, her eyes cold and hard. "Maybe you were, Ryan, but I wasn't. I was playing a role, trying to be the perfect wife for you. And I'm done pretending." I felt a wave of nausea, the room spinning around me. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, couldn't believe the woman I loved was standing in front of me, saying these things like it was nothing, like everything we had built was meaningless. "Fine," I said, my voice hollow. "If that's what you want, then go." I'm done trying to make you stay. If you think you'll be happier with Greg, then be my guest. But don't you dare come back when it falls apart." She didn't respond, just turned back to her suitcase and continued packing. I watched her for a moment, my heart breaking all over again, and then I turned and walked out of the room. I couldn't stand to watch her leave. It was too much. The weight of everything. Her betrayal, her indifference, the end of our life together. It was too much to bear. I went to the living room and collapsed on the couch, staring at the wall, my mind blank. I heard her moving around, zipping the suitcase, her footsteps echoing down the hall. And then the front door opened, and she was gone. The silence that followed was deafening. I sat there, staring at the empty space where she used to be, feeling nothing and everything all at once. Anger, hurt, disbelief, sorrow. It all crashed over me, wave after wave, until I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, to punch something, to make it all stop, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed by the finality of it, by the realization that she was truly gone. It was over. The life I thought I had, the marriage I thought we were fighting for, was gone. Karen had made her choice, and there was no coming back from this. She had chosen Greg, chosen herself, chosen anything but me. And as much as it hurt, as much as it tore me apart, I knew I had to let her go. She wasn't the woman I married anymore. She was someone else, someone I didn't recognize, someone who didn't love me the way I loved her. And maybe she was right. Maybe I had been blind to her unhappiness. Maybe I hadn't seen the signs. But that didn't excuse what she had done. It didn't excuse the lies, the betrayal, the way she had torn us apart without a second thought. I closed my eyes, trying to shut out the pain, trying to find something, anything, to hold on to. But all I felt was emptiness, a hollow ache where my heart used to be. I didn't know what came next, didn't know how to move forward from this. All I knew was that I couldn't keep living in the past, couldn't keep holding on to someone who had already let go. It was time to face the truth. Karen was gone, and I had to find a way to be okay with that in the days after Karen left. The house felt like a graveyard. Everything reminded me of her. The coffee mugs in the kitchen, the blankets she always insisted on having on the couch, even the silly magnets we had bought during vacations, all tainted by her absence. It was as if her ghost lingered in every corner of our home, and I couldn't escape it. The silence was suffocating, so I did the only thing that made sense. I threw myself into work, drowning out the emptiness with endless meetings and deadlines. One evening, a week after she had left, I decided I couldn't be in that house anymore. I needed to get out. I needed to breathe. I ended up at a bar not far from downtown, the kind of place that had dim lighting and stools that creaked when you sat down. A place where no one asked questions and everyone minded their own business. It was exactly what I needed. I ordered a whiskey, neat, and took a seat at the far end of the bar, away from the crowds. The bartender, an older guy with a kind face, nodded at me as he poured my drink, and I gave him a tired smile. I wasn't looking for conversation, and he seemed to understand that. I just needed a place to disappear for a while. I was on my second glass, the burn of the alcohol slowly numbing the edges of my thoughts, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. A voice I never expected to hear in a place like this. "Ryan." I turned, and there she was, Megan. She worked at the same company as Karen, though in a different department. We had met a few times at office events, always pleasant, always smiling. But now, standing there with her coat half off and a surprised expression on her face, she looked out of place, like a bright spot in the dim haze of the bar. "Megan," I said, blinking, trying to make sure I wasn't imagining things. She smiled, though it was hesitant, like she wasn't sure if she should approach. "Hey, I didn't expect to see you here." "Yeah, I didn't expect to see you here either," she said, and there was something in her voice. Concern, maybe pity. I wasn't sure, and I wasn't sure I wanted to know. She gestured to the empty stool next to me. "Mind if I sit?" I shrugged. "Sure, go ahead." She ordered a drink, and for a few moments we sat in silence. I could feel her glancing at me, like she was trying to figure out what to say. Finally, she spoke. "I heard about Karen," she said quietly. "I'm really sorry, Ryan." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Yeah, well, it is what it is," I muttered, staring at the amber liquid in my glass. "She made her choice. Megan nodded, her expression softening. I know, I don't want to pry, but if you need to talk, I'm here. I know it's none of my business, but I care about you, Ryan. You don't deserve what she's doing. I looked at her then, really looked at her. There was no judgment in her eyes, no hint of the pity I'd been dreading, just genuine concern, a warmth that I hadn't felt in a long time. I swallowed hard, the tightness in my chest loosening just a bit. You know, I said, my voice rough. I followed her last week, saw her with Greg. She didn't even bother hiding it. It's like she wanted me to find out, like she wanted an excuse to walk away. Megan's eyes darkened, and she shook her head. I never liked that guy. He's a snake. Everyone at the office knows it. I'm sorry you had to go through that. We sat there for a while just talking. She listened, really listened, as I spilled everything I had kept inside. How I had tried to be a good husband, how I had ignored the signs, how it felt to see her with another man. Megan didn't interrupt, didn't offer empty reassurances. She just listened, her eyes never leaving mine, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. And then she said something that took me completely by surprise. You know, you deserve better than this, Ryan. You deserve someone who sees you, who appreciates you, not someone who just takes you for granted. I looked at her, and there was something in her gaze, something that made my heart skip a beat. It was warmth, yes, but there was something else too. Something deeper, something I hadn't seen in a long time. I wasn't sure what it was, but it made me feel different. It made me feel like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as broken as I thought. Thanks, Megan, I said, my voice soft. I don't know what comes next, but thanks for being here. She smiled then, a real smile, and it was like a light in the darkness. Anytime, Ryan. You're not alone. Okay? We ended up staying at the bar for hours, just talking. For the first time since Karen left, I laughed. It wasn't forced, wasn't fake. It was real, and it felt like a part of me that had been buried was finally coming back to life. When we finally left, the cold night air hit me, and I realized I didn't want to go back to that empty house. Not alone. Megan must have seen it on my face, because she hesitated, then said, "You want to grab a coffee or something? I know a place that's open late." I looked at her, at the way her eyes held mine without flinching, and I nodded. Yeah, I'd like that. We walked down the street, side by side, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe Karen was gone. Maybe the life I thought I had was over. But as I walked with Megan, I realized that maybe, just maybe, that wasn't the end. Maybe it was just the beginning of something new. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity. My head wasn't pounding with anger or clouded by grief. I felt lighter, like for the first time in ages, I could see my life clearly. Spending time with Megan the previous night had done something I hadn't expected. It gave me a glimpse of what it felt like to be genuinely cared for again, without conditions or lies. After we left the bar, we ended up at a cozy little cafe that Megan knew, tucked away on a quiet street. We talked until almost sunrise, not just about Karen or Greg, but about anything and everything. We shared stories, joked about ridiculous things that had happened at our workplaces, and for a while I even forgot about the mess that was waiting for me at home. Megan had this way of pulling me out of my own head, of making me feel like there was more to my life than the betrayal and heartbreak. She reminded me that I was still myself, someone worth knowing, worth being around. But all that clarity also made one thing very obvious. I couldn't keep pretending my marriage had any hope of surviving. Karen had walked out, and whether she'd eventually come crawling back or not, the truth was we were over. There was no repairing the damage. I needed to face it, to take the steps necessary to end things properly. I needed closure. So, later that afternoon, I did something I never thought I'd do. I drove to Greg's house. I knew where he lived. Karen had mentioned it enough times in the context of office events and parties she was supposedly too busy to attend. It was a flashy place, of course, in one of those neighborhoods where the lawns are perfectly manicured and the cars in the driveways are always spotless. I parked down the street and sat there for a moment, my heart pounding. I wasn't entirely sure what I hoped to achieve by being there, but something inside me needed this. I needed to see it all for myself, to face what had happened head on. Taking a deep breath, I got out of the car and walked up to the front door. I could feel my pulse in my throat, but I forced myself to stay calm. I rang the doorbell and waited, the seconds stretching out like hours. The door opened, and there she was, Karen. She looked surprised, her eyes widening when she saw me standing there. She was wearing one of those casual outfits she always reserved for weekends at home. Leggings, a loose sweater, her hair tied up. For a moment, we just stared at each other, and I could see the shock flicker in her eyes, quickly replaced by annoyance. "Ryan," she said, her voice flat. "What are you doing here?" I swallowed, my mouth dry. "We need to talk, Karen, and I wasn't going to keep waiting around for you to come back. We need to figure out what happens next." She let out an exasperated sigh, glancing over her shoulder before stepping out onto the porch, closing the door behind her. "This really isn't the time," she muttered. "I'm busy." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Busy? She had left our home, left our life together, and now I was supposed to respect her schedule? Busy, I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "You're seriously going to stand there and tell me you're too busy to talk about our marriage?" Her face hardened, her lips pressing into a thin line. "Look, I don't want to do this right now. I've already told you how I feel, Ryan. Coming here, showing up unannounced, it's not going to change anything." I took a step closer, my anger bubbling to the surface. "That's the thing, Karen. I'm not here to change anything. I'm here because I need to hear it from you, face to face. Are you really done with us? Are you really willing to throw away everything we built for this?" She hesitated, her eyes flickering away from mine. For the first time, I saw something like doubt cross her face, and it made my heart clench. Was there still a part of her that cared? Was there still a chance? But then the door opened behind her, and Greg appeared. He was wearing a smug grin, his eyes flicking between me and Karen as if he was enjoying the show. "Everything all right out here?" he asked, his tone casual, almost mocking. Karen turned, her expression shifting immediately, softening as she looked at him. "It's fine, Greg. I'm handling it," she said, her voice suddenly sweet, the edge gone. And that's when it hit me, the final nail in the coffin. The look she gave Greg, the way her entire demeanor changed in his presence. It was everything I needed to see. She had made her choice. She wasn't conflicted. She wasn't struggling between two lives. She had picked her side, and it wasn't mine. I felt something break inside me, a weight lifting even as my heart shattered. I looked at Greg, his smirk making my blood boil, and I took a step back. "You know what, Karen?" I said, my voice surprisingly calm. "I don't need to hear anything else from you. I see it now. You've made your choice, and I'm not going to stand here begging for scraps." Her eyes widened, and for a split second, I thought I saw a flicker of regret. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, and she just nodded, her expression closing off. "I'm sorry it had to be this way, Ryan," she said, though her voice lacked any real emotion. I turned, my fists clenched, and walked away. I could hear Greg saying something to her, his voice low, almost amused, but I didn't turn back. I didn't need to hear it. Whatever they had, whatever lies they were telling themselves, it was no longer my problem. I got in my car, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. As I drove, a strange sense of peace settled over me. It was done. There was no more wondering, no more hoping. Karen had chosen her path, and now it was time for me to choose mine. I pulled over at a park a few miles away, the sun setting behind the trees, casting long shadows across the grass. I sat there for a moment, taking it all in, and then I pulled out my phone. I needed to talk to someone who had been there for me when no one else was. I found Megan's number and sent her a message. "Hey, it's over. I need a fresh start. Want to grab dinner tonight?" A few seconds later, my phone buzzed with her reply. "I'd love that. You're going to be okay, Ryan." For the first time, I believed it. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I wasn't alone. I knew there were people who cared, people who wouldn't lie, who wouldn't betray me. And as I watched the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a spark of hope flicker to life inside me. It was time to let go of the past and start building something new. And maybe, just maybe, this time it would be with someone who truly cared. Later that evening, I met Megan for dinner at a small Italian restaurant she had suggested. It was cozy, with warm lighting and the smell of fresh bread wafting through the air. As soon as I saw her, something inside me relaxed. She stood to greet me, her smile genuine, her eyes filled with concern, and as I walked over, I realized I had been looking forward to seeing her all day. "Hey," I said, pulling out the chair across from her. "Hey," she replied, her voice soft. "I'm really glad you called." We ordered our food, and soon the conversation started flowing, light and easy, like it had the night before. It felt natural to be with her, to share my thoughts without feeling like I was being judged. We talked about work, movies we wanted to see, and places we wanted to visit someday. It wasn't forced or uncomfortable. It was just nice. Eventually, the conversation drifted back to what had happened earlier that day. I told her about going to Greg's house, about what I had said to Karen, and how it had all ended. She listened quietly, nodding, her gaze never leaving mine. "You really did it?" she asked, a hint of admiration in her voice. "You went there and faced her?" I nodded, taking a sip of wine. "Yeah, I needed to. I couldn't keep living in limbo, hoping she'd change her mind. I needed to see it for what it was." I looked down at the table, the words coming out heavier than I had expected. It hurt, seeing her with him like that, knowing it was really over. But in a way, it also felt freeing. Megan reached across the table and placed her hand on mine, her touch warm and comforting. "You did the right thing, Ryan. You deserve someone who actually wants to be with you, not someone who's just stringing you along. It's going to be hard, but you're strong enough to get through it." I looked up at her, my eyes meeting hers, and I felt that flicker of hope again. She wasn't just saying it to make me feel better. She meant it, and for the first time, I started to believe it too. We stayed at the restaurant until it closed, talking and laughing, losing track of time. It felt like a break from reality, a glimpse of what life could be if I let myself move on. When we finally left, Megan offered to walk me back to my car, her arm brushing against mine as we strolled down the quiet street. As we reached my car, we paused, neither of us quite ready for the night to end. I turned to her, the words catching in my throat for a moment before I finally spoke. "Megan, I don't know what's next for me. I don't even know if I'm ready for whatever this might be," I said, gesturing between us. "But I know I like being around you, and I'd like to see where it goes, if you're okay with that." She smiled, her eyes softening. "I get it, Ryan. I'm not in any rush. I just want to be here for you however you need me, and maybe eventually we can see what this could be." I leaned in, kissing her on the cheek, my heart pounding. She turned her face slightly, and for a brief moment, our lips touched, just enough to send a spark through my entire body. It wasn't rushed or desperate. It was gentle and it was real. "Good night, Megan," I whispered, stepping back, my head spinning with a mixture of emotions. Hope, fear, excitement. "Good night, Ryan," she replied, her smile lingering as she turned and walked away, glancing back at me one last time before disappearing around the corner. I drove home with a strange sense of calm, the memories of Karen and everything that had happened still there, but somehow less sharp, less painful. It wasn't that I had forgotten, but rather that I could finally see past it. When I arrived home, the house felt different. The emptiness was still there, but it no longer felt like it was suffocating me. I knew Karen wasn't coming back, and for the first time I was okay with that. I sat down on the couch, the same one where we had argued, the same one where I had watched her leave, and I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past few weeks begin to lift. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. I picked it up, expecting a message from Megan, but instead, it was a number I didn't recognize. I frowned, opening it. The message read, "You need to know something about Greg. He's not who you think he is. Meet me tomorrow at the cafe on 5th. It's important." My heart skipped a beat. Who was this? And what could they possibly have to say about Greg? I reread the message, trying to make sense of it. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to put everything about Greg and Karen behind me, but another part, perhaps the part that still needed answers, couldn't let it go. The next morning, I made my way to the cafe, my mind racing with possibilities. Who could it be? Someone from Karen's work? A friend of Greg's? I arrived early, ordered a coffee, and took a seat by the window, my eyes scanning the room. After a few minutes, a woman approached my table. She looked familiar, and as she sat down, I realized I had seen her before. At Karen's office party a few years back, she introduced herself as Lisa, one of Karen's colleagues. "Thanks for coming, Ryan," she said, her voice low, her eyes darting around nervously. "I don't have a lot of time, but you need to hear this." I leaned forward, my heart pounding. "What is it?" She took a deep breath, her expression serious. "Greg isn't just Karen's boss. He's done this before. Gotten involved with women at work, made promises, then moved on when things got complicated. He's manipulative, Ryan. He knows exactly how to get what he wants, and he doesn't care who gets hurt in the process." I stared at her, the words sinking in slowly. "What are you saying? That Karen is just another one of his affairs?" Lisa nodded. "Yes, I've seen it happen before. He's good at it. He makes them feel special, makes them think he's the answer to all their problems. But it never lasts. He always finds someone else. I thought you should know before it's too late for Karen." I sat back, the room spinning. The anger, the betrayal, it all came rushing back. But this time it was mixed with something else. Pity. Karen had thrown everything away for a man who saw her as nothing more than a temporary fling. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Lisa looked down, her expression pained. "Because I know what it's like to be lied to be manipulated by someone you trust. I don't know if you can save your marriage, but I thought you deserved to know the truth." I nodded, swallowing hard. "Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate it." She stood, giving me a sad smile. "Good luck, Ryan. I hope you find what you're looking for." As she walked away, I sat there, staring at my coffee, my mind reeling. Karen had made her choice, but maybe she didn't know the whole story. Maybe she was as much a victim as I had been. For a moment, I considered reaching out to her, warning her, trying to get her to see the truth. But then I thought of Megan, of the warmth in her smile, of the hope she had given me. I realized that whatever Karen chose to do, it was no longer my responsibility. She had walked away from us, from me, and now it was my turn to walk away from her, and towards something better. I stood up, left some money on the table, and walked out of the cafe. The sun was shining, the air crisp and cool, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt like I was finally ready to let go. That evening, I sat in the living room, looking around at the house that had once been filled with laughter, with plans for the future. It was strange how quickly it had all changed, how something that once seemed so solid could become empty and foreign in just a matter of weeks. I picked up the framed photo of Karen and me from the mantel, taken on our honeymoon, smiling, sunburned, full of dreams. Felt like it belonged to someone else's life now. I knew what I needed to do. It wasn't enough to just let her go emotionally. I needed to close this chapter entirely. I needed to take action. I grabbed my laptop, opened it up, and began looking into the steps for filing for divorce. It was time to make it official, to sever the tie that had already been broken so many times in our hearts and minds. Each click, each form I filled out, felt like I was chiseling away at the pain, finally reclaiming my own life. The paperwork was overwhelming, but also liberating. It was as if every field I filled in, every digital signature I made, was a piece of the weight that I had been carrying being chipped away. When I finally clicked submit, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. It was done. The first step toward freedom, toward my new life. That night I called Megan. I told her everything about Lisa, about the message, and about filing for divorce. She listened without interruption, her voice steady and supportive as always. When I finished, there was a pause, and then she spoke. "Ryan, you did the right thing. You deserve to move on, and I think you're finally allowing yourself that chance." There was a warmth in her voice that wrapped around me like a blanket, comforting and real. "I know it might be too soon to say this, but I want you to know that I'm here for you, no matter what happens." I swallowed, emotion tightening my throat. "Megan, I don't know where this is going, but I want to see where it could go. With you, you've been a light in all this darkness. I don't know if I deserve it, but I'd like to try." She didn't hesitate. "You do deserve it, Ryan, and I'd like to try too." The next few days moved in a blur of sorting, packing, and organizing. I decided it was time to leave the house. There were too many memories in its walls, too many ghosts of what once was. I rented a smaller apartment on the other side of town. A fresh start in a place without echoes of Karen in every room. I spent those days packing up boxes, deciding what to take and what to leave behind. I boxed up the mementos from our life together and put them aside, knowing I wasn't ready to face them just yet. On the last night in that house, I invited Megan over. Felt right having her there, helping me say goodbye to a life that no longer fit. She showed up with a bottle of champagne and a smile that made everything else fade into the background. We sat on the floor, surrounded by boxes, and toasted to new beginnings. To freedom, I said, clinking my glass against hers. To hope, she replied, her eyes holding mine, a smile playing on her lips. We talked for hours, the empty house echoing our laughter, filling it one last time with joy before I moved on. It was bittersweet, but it felt like closure. The life I'd shared with Karen was over, and I was finally ready to accept it. Ready to let go of the anger, the hurt, and to allow myself to embrace something new. The next morning, with the last box loaded into the truck, I stood on the front lawn and looked at the house one final time. I expected to feel a pang of sadness, a sense of loss, but instead I felt relief. I had given everything to that marriage, to that version of my life. And now it was time to give something to myself. I turned to Megan, who was waiting by her car, her face full of encouragement and something deeper. Something that promised a future I hadn't dared to imagine until now. I walked over to her, and for a moment we stood there, the morning sun warming our faces. I reached for her hand, and she held it tightly, her fingers lacing with mine. "You ready?" she asked, her eyes searching mine, a hint of a smile tugging at her lips. I nodded. "Yeah, I'm ready." We drove to my new place together, and as we walked through the door of the apartment, I felt a sense of lightness that had been absent for so long. There were no ghosts here, no memories of broken promises. It was a blank slate, a chance to start over, to build something real with someone who truly cared. As we set down the boxes, Megan turned to me, her eyes soft, her smile genuine. "This is your fresh start, Ryan. You can make it whatever you want." I looked around the empty apartment, then back at her, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a true sense of hope. "I think I already have everything I need," I said, pulling her close, wrapping my arms around her. We stayed like that for a while, standing in the middle of my new living room, the possibilities stretching out before us. I knew there would still be hard days ahead. Divorce was never easy, and the scars of betrayal didn't fade overnight. But for the first time since everything had fallen apart, I felt like I could see a future worth fighting for. A future that was mine. It wasn't about Karen anymore. It wasn't about Greg or the betrayal or the anger. It was about me, reclaiming my life, my happiness, and maybe, just maybe, finding love again. And with Megan by my side, I was ready to face whatever came next.